A life reshaped by lies. Mila let out a frustrated sigh and shook her head. Unbelievable. What a complete idiot, she murmured under her breath. A second later, she realized she'd said the same thing several times already and couldn't help laughing at herself. Across the cafe table, Beth smirked knowingly. "You remember I told you months ago he wasn't worth your time," she said. "Seriously, Jules, what did you ever see in him? You have excellent judgment about almost everything except that guy. He was a disaster from day one." Mila knew Beth had a point, but part of her still felt compelled to defend Juan. She offered a faint smile. "At the beginning, it wasn't like that. It really felt like we loved each other." Beth rolled her eyes dramatically. "Love? Please. The only person one has ever been in love with is the one staring back at him in the mirror." She crossed her eyes for emphasis before laughing at her own joke. Okay, maybe that was a little dramatic. Mila couldn't stop herself from laughing too. No, it was pretty accurate. Her smile softened. "Thanks, Beth. I mean it." Beth shrugged, suddenly looking a little embarrassed. "You don't have to thank me. You'd be there for me too." "I'm not so sure about that," Mila admitted, playfully resting her head against Beth's shoulder with an exaggerated pout. Beth chuckled before her expression turned serious. "So, he really took everything?" Mila lowered her eyes and quietly nodded. "And now?" Beth asked gently. "What's your plan?" The question hit harder than Mila expected. She didn't have a real answer. Her savings were gone. Finding work wouldn't be easy, and she had no specialized skills to fall back on. For years she'd relied more on her confidence, personality, and appearance than on building a stable career. Now she was facing the frightening reality of starting over from nothing. The pressure became too much, and tears welled in her eyes. Beth noticed immediately. "Hey, don't cry." She reached across the table. "Listen, I think I have an idea." Mila looked up. "I inherited some money from an aunt I barely knew," Beth explained. "It's more than enough to help for a while. Why don't you move in with me? Stay as long as you need. You can take online classes, learn new skills, and figure out what you really want to do. I'll cover the basics until you're back on your feet, and if you insist, you can pay me back someday." For a moment, Mila couldn't speak. No one had ever offered her that kind of kindness without expecting something in return. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time they came from gratitude rather than heartbreak. She laughed softly through them. "Well, you make a convincing argument," she joked. "The only thing I can contribute right now is breakfast in bed." Beth folded her arms with exaggerated seriousness. "Breakfast in bed every now and then?" "Absolutely. Then we've got ourselves a deal." Both women laughed, and for the first time in weeks, Mila felt the crushing weight on her chest begin to lift. A few days later, she packed the handful of belongings she still owned and walked away from the apartment that held so many painful memories. Beth's home felt like stepping into an entirely different life. Sunlight streamed through large windows overlooking a peaceful neighborhood park, filling the rooms with warmth. The atmosphere was calm, welcoming, and unmistakably cared for. The guest bedroom waiting for Mila was simple but comfortable. It held a queen-sized bed with fresh linens, a sturdy dresser, and a small vanity tucked neatly into one corner. The shared bathroom featured a bathtub, a separate shower, and 2 sinks, all spotless and well-organized. Nothing about the apartment was extravagant. What made it special was the care Beth had poured into every detail. Standing in her new room, Mila allowed herself to believe that maybe this wasn't the end of her story after all. Maybe it was the beginning of something better. Beth's generosity didn't stop with offering a place to live. Within a week, she surprised Mila with a refurbished desktop computer, carefully setting it up on a sturdy second-hand desk in the spare room. She arranged for reliable high-speed internet and helped Mila register for several online courses that matched her interests and abilities. Almost every evening after dinner, the two of them sat side by side, reviewing Mila's old school records, discussing career possibilities, and mapping out realistic goals for the future. For the first time in years, Mila wasn't simply hoping her life would improve. She was finally taking real steps toward building a future she could be proud of. Much to both Beth's and Mila's surprise, Mila's old high school records painted a very different picture than either of them expected. Beth stared at the transcript with raised eyebrows. "You graduated with honors?" she asked, genuinely impressed. "Why have you never told me this?" Mila gave an awkward little shrug. "I honestly don't know. I guess it just never seemed important." After comparing different career options, they concluded that earning an associate degree in pharmacy would provide the quickest route to a reliable, well-paying profession. From that day forward, Mila devoted herself completely to her studies. Beth made sure she ate properly and stocked the apartment with healthy meals and vitamins, helping Mila regain both her strength and confidence. With each passing week, her motivation grew stronger. She studied relentlessly, often staying up late reviewing coursework, and her determination paid off. She completed the entire program nearly 6 months earlier than expected. Her success inspired her to keep going. Rather than stopping with the associate degree, she enrolled in additional classes that would eventually lead toward a bachelor's degree in pharmacology. When her diploma finally arrived, Beth refused to let the milestone pass quietly. "We're celebrating," she declared. "No arguments." As Mila got dressed for the evening, however, something felt off. Her clothes no longer fit the way they once had. Some outfits clung too tightly, while others seemed strangely loose. Her arms and legs appeared leaner and more defined, yet her waist had become noticeably broader. What unsettled her most was her chest. It looked smaller than she remembered. Beth noticed her discomfort and helped her choose an elegant pantsuit that disguised the changes as much as possible. Together they visited a salon, had their hair styled, enjoyed professional makeup, and spent the evening celebrating Mila's achievement. Even so, Beth couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling growing in the back of her mind. The physical changes weren't the only thing bothering her. Using one of her personal contacts, she quietly arranged for a physician to stop by the apartment the next afternoon. Before the appointment, Beth sat across from Mila with an unusually serious expression. "I've been worried about you," she admitted softly. "It's not just the changes in your body. You don't seem like yourself lately. You look exhausted, almost like something's draining your energy." Hearing the concern in Beth's voice touched Mila more deeply than she expected. Without thinking, she stepped forward, wrapped her arms around Beth, and kissed her. The unexpected gesture froze them both. A heartbeat later, they separated, equally stunned. Mila's face turned bright red. "Oh my gosh. Beth, I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I don't know what came over me. I never meant to do that." Beth remained silent for a moment, clearly trying to process what had just happened. Before either of them could say another word, a knock echoed through the apartment. Grateful for the interruption, Beth hurried to answer the door. A middle-aged physician stood outside carrying a medical bag. "Perfect timing," Beth said, stepping aside. "Come in, doctor." She motioned toward the living room. "This is Mila, the patient I mentioned." The doctor greeted her politely, but as soon as he got a closer look, his expression shifted. His eyes widened with unmistakable surprise. Good heavens! The words escaped before he could stop himself. Realizing how unprofessional that sounded, he immediately cleared his throat. "My apologies," he said with an embarrassed smile. That wasn't exactly an appropriate first impression. Regaining his composure, he gestured toward the hallway. "If you don't mind, let's head to your room where I can perform a proper examination." With a reassuring smile, he lightly guided Mila by the elbow as they walked toward the bedroom, already considering the questions he needed to ask. As the doctor followed Mila into the bedroom, he quietly observed the surroundings. The room was warm and inviting, decorated with soft colors and personal touches that reflected its owner. His attention settled on a framed diploma displayed proudly beside the computer. He stepped closer and read it aloud. "Mila A. Benson, Associate Degree." He gave her a polite nod before continuing his examination, but something about her appearance clearly troubled him. The faint greenish hue around her lips and the subtle discoloration beneath her eyes were difficult to ignore. After drawing a small blood sample, he sealed the vial and placed it carefully into his medical kit. "I'd like to ask you a few personal questions," he said gently. "Some of them may seem unusual, but they'll help me understand what's happening. Is that okay? Although slightly uncomfortable, Mila nodded. The doctor paused for a moment, choosing his words carefully. How long have you identified as a woman? Outside the partially closed bedroom door, Beth immediately covered her mouth to keep from laughing. Everything was unfolding exactly as she had anticipated. Quietly slipping away, she wandered into the kitchen and began preparing coffee, struggling to hide the smile spreading across her face. To Mila, Beth was simply the loyal friend who had helped her rebuild her life. But Beth carried another identity. Years ago, she had been known as Riley, a person Mila had once treated very differently. This evening represented the final move in a carefully orchestrated plan that had taken months of patience, planning, and considerable expense. Every decision, every coincidence, every carefully arranged event had led to this moment. As the coffee brewed, Beth hugged herself with quiet satisfaction. Soon, Mila would understand exactly what Riley had once endured. Meanwhile, inside the bedroom, Mila stared at the doctor as though he had completely lost his mind. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "I am a woman." Her old confidence briefly resurfaced as she folded her arms and fixed him with an irritated glare. The doctor remained remarkably calm. "I understand that's how you see yourself," he replied. "I'm not questioning your identity. I simply need to know how long you've been receiving hormone therapy and who has been supervising your treatment. If these symptoms are medication-related, I'll need to consult your specialist." He raised his hands reassuringly. "Please don't think I'm judging you. A member of my own family recently completed gender-affirming treatment, and she's happier now than she's ever been." His sincerity was obvious. Mila hesitated, unsure how to answer such an unexpected question. Finally, with an exasperated sigh, she stood up and quickly removed her clothing to end the misunderstanding once and for all. The doctor froze. His eyes widened as he examined her. He blinked several times, clearly trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he had assumed. I don't understand," he admitted. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "Your friend referred to you as Jules, and based on your physical features, I believed you were transitioning from male to female." A look of embarrassment crossed his face. "My sincerest apologies." After a brief pause, another possibility occurred to him. "Unless," he said cautiously, "have you instead been transitioning from female to male?" For a second, Mila simply stared at him. Then she burst into uncontrollable laughter. Between fits of giggling, she shook her head. "Doctor, you certainly don't make small mistakes." Still smiling, she took a deep breath. "Let me make this perfectly clear. I was born female. I've always lived as a woman, and I have absolutely no intention of changing that." The doctor quietly collected himself, his expression becoming noticeably more serious. "I truly apologize for my assumptions," he said sincerely. He paused before continuing. "However, I'm beginning to think there's something far more unusual happening here." His eyes searched hers carefully. "Do you happen to have any photographs of yourself from about a year ago?" The question lingered in the silence. Whatever lightheartedness had filled the room only moments earlier disappeared, replaced by an uneasy feeling that something far more significant was about to be uncovered. "Yes, I think so," Mila replied uncertainly. She walked over to her purse, searched through it for a moment, and pulled out an old photograph of her former band. It had been taken shortly before one of the members, Mike, unexpectedly left the group. Since then, Mike had started a new life under the name Riley. She handed the photo to Dr. Johns. He examined it for only a few seconds before his expression changed completely. "Oh, no." Without another word, he gently took Mila by the arm and led her in front of the large mirror above the vanity. "Look closely," he urged, holding the photograph beside her reflection. "Can't you see the difference?" Mila stared silently. Her eyes shifted between the image in her hands and the woman reflected in the mirror. The contrast was impossible to dismiss. In the old picture, her face appeared softer, her features more delicate, and her overall appearance unmistakably feminine. The reflection before her told a different story. Her jawline looked stronger, her facial structure more angular, and her shoulders noticeably wider than she remembered. The changes weren't subtle. They were striking. A wave of disbelief washed over her. Her knees weakened, and she slowly lowered herself onto the edge of the bed, unable to tear her eyes away from the mirror. Her thoughts raced, but none of them made sense. Dr. Johns looked from the photograph to Mila and back again, his concern deepening. "Hold on," he murmured. His gaze settled on another person in the picture. "I didn't realize Beth used to be in your band." Still overwhelmed, Mila blinked in confusion. "What?" She looked more closely before shaking her head. "No, that's not Beth." She pointed to the woman beside her. "That's Riley. She was one of our backup singers." The doctor frowned thoughtfully as he studied the photograph again. Mila let out a frustrated sigh. "How could I have missed all of this?" Dr. Johns answered with calm understanding. "It happens more often than people think." He nodded toward the framed diploma sitting beside her computer. "You've been completely immersed in school. Finishing a degree early takes an incredible amount of focus." He glanced around the room. "You also told me you've been spending most of your time studying at home. If you're living in comfortable clothes like sweatpants, hoodies, and oversized outfits, gradual physical changes can go unnoticed." He lifted the photograph once more. "But these differences are significant," he said quietly. "They're not something I'd expect to happen without an underlying cause." His expression grew more serious. "I'm taking your blood sample to the laboratory immediately." He carefully packed the vial into his medical case. "I also want you to arrange a full evaluation at the hospital as soon as possible." Mila swallowed hard. "Is it really that serious?" The doctor hesitated before answering. "I don't want to alarm you unnecessarily." He chose each word with care. "But the symptoms you've described, combined with what I'm seeing today, suggest your body may be reacting to something abnormal." He paused. "If the laboratory findings confirm my suspicions, you could require a blood transfusion." Mila's heart sank. "The hormonal irregularities and other physical changes concern me," he continued. "We need to determine exactly what's causing them before they become more dangerous." He rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Please make time within the next couple of days for additional testing. If treatment is necessary, we'll begin immediately." After studying her anxious expression, he asked gently, "If you'd feel more comfortable, I can take you to the hospital right now." Mila slowly shook her head. "No, I'd rather wait until you know more." He nodded. "All right." Closing his medical bag, he offered an encouraging smile. "Try not to let your imagination run wild. We'll get some answers soon." He gave her shoulder a reassuring squeeze before walking out of the bedroom. When he entered the kitchen, Beth was waiting with a freshly brewed pot of coffee. "Coffee before you go?" she asked with a friendly smile. Dr. Johns reached for his coat and shook his head. "I wish I had the time." He picked up his medical bag. "I need to get these samples to the lab immediately." His expression remained unusually grave. "Your friend is dealing with something serious, and I want to know exactly what we're facing." As he opened the front door, he glanced back at Beth. "You did the right thing by calling me." With that, he hurried out, leaving the apartment wrapped in an uneasy silence. "You may have saved her life," Dr. Johns said quietly before hurrying out the door. The apartment fell silent. A few minutes later, Mila wandered into the kitchen. She looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped as she poured herself a cup of coffee with trembling hands. Beth watched her carefully. "What did the doctor say?" she asked gently. The question shattered the fragile composure Mila had been holding together. I might be dying," she whispered. Tears immediately filled her eyes. For a brief moment, Beth, whose real identity was Riley, felt a sharp knot of guilt tighten in her stomach. "Have I taken this too far?" The thought appeared before she quickly buried it. Keeping her voice calm, she stepped closer. "Listen, Jules, I need to head out for a little while. Will you be okay on your own? Is there anything you need before I leave?" Mila slowly shook her head. "No." She managed a weak smile through her tears. "You've already done more for me than anyone else ever has. I'll be all right." Although she nodded, Beth left with a heavy heart. The drive home felt much longer than usual. When she walked through the front door, Alexis looked up in surprise. "Riley? You're home already?" She frowned. "So, how's your revenge plan going?" Instead of answering, Riley suddenly broke down. She covered her face and burst into tears. "Oh, Alexis, what have I done?" Without another word, she rushed down the hallway and disappeared into the house. Alexis remained frozen near the entrance. What just happened? She searched several rooms, but Riley had locked herself away somewhere she couldn't reach. Uneasy questions raced through Alexis's mind. Had something happened with Mila? Was Riley hiding something? Determined to find out, Alexis grabbed her keys and a small digital recorder. Before leaving, she scribbled a quick note for Riley and left it on the dining table. A short drive later, she arrived at Beth's apartment. Mila answered the door. Her tired smile showed genuine surprise. "Alexis? I wasn't expecting you." She stepped aside. "Come in." Alexis entered and quietly closed the door. "We can skip the polite conversation," she said, her tone serious. "I came because I need some honest answers." She placed the recorder on the kitchen table. Before turning it on, however, she finally looked closely at Mila. Her eyes widened. "My God." She stared for a moment. "What happened to you?" Mila gave a tired shrug. "I wish I knew." She lowered her eyes to the mug in her hands. "My doctor thinks something is seriously wrong. He's running tests." After a brief silence, she added quietly, "Maybe this is my punishment." Her voice sounded strangely calm. "I've made plenty of mistakes in my life." She sighed. "It's just, Beth has done so much to help me. I finally felt like I had a chance to rebuild everything." A faint, bittersweet smile crossed her face. "If I make it through this, maybe I can finally have a normal life." Then she laughed softly. "One thing I know for certain." She looked up. "I'm done with men." She gestured toward the coffee maker. "Honestly, I think I'd rather date women." She poured Alexis a fresh cup, and together they prepared their coffee exactly the way each of them liked it before sitting across from one another. Mila's eyes drifted toward the recorder. "What's on that?" Alexis rested her hands on the table. "I need you to listen to something." Her voice was calm but firm. "And whatever you hear, promise me you won't interrupt until it's finished." Mila hesitated only briefly before nodding. "All right." Alexis pressed the play button. Kayla's recorded voice filled the room. As the confession unfolded, Mila's expression changed. Her cheeks flushed crimson. Several times she inhaled sharply, clearly ready to explode with anger, but each time she remembered her promise and forced herself to remain silent. Finally, the recording came to an end. Mila shot up from her chair. "What a manipulative liar," she shouted, her voice trembling with rage. She paced the kitchen furiously. "It was never my idea to turn Mike into a woman." She shook her head. "That whole stunt was Juan's and Kayla's plan. They thought it would attract attention and make the band more popular." Her breathing slowly steadied. "But I'll admit something." Her voice softened. "The more feminine Mike became, the more attached I grew." She looked down at the floor. "I fell in love with him." A sad smile briefly appeared. "He was gentle, thoughtful, and he treated me better than anyone ever had." She swallowed hard before continuing. "My boyfriend before him, Brian, was violent." Her eyes became distant. "If I complained about anything, he'd hit me." She took a shaky breath. "One beating put me in the hospital for 3 months." She laughed bitterly. The worst part? His new girlfriend stood there laughing while it happened. Silence settled over the room. "So, when Mike came into my life," she closed her eyes. "I held on to him. He made me feel safe." Her smile returned, though this time it carried nothing but sadness. "And yes, our relationship was wonderful in every way." She wiped at the corner of one eye. "I loved him more deeply than I ever admitted." After a long pause, regret filled her voice. "I never wanted to hurt him. I honestly believed he was happy. Even after he looked more feminine than masculine, my feelings never changed." She laughed quietly through tears. "I loved dressing him up. He became my favorite person." Another tear rolled down her cheek. I miss him every single day. Alexis sat speechless. Everything Riley had told her suddenly seemed far less straightforward. The truth wasn't as simple as victim and villain. There were pieces missing. After gathering her thoughts, Alexis leaned forward. "All right," she said carefully. "Let's put the past aside for a moment." She met Mila's eyes. "If what you're telling me is true, then who is really responsible for pushing Mike down that path?" Mila let out a slow, weary breath before answering. "Juan definitely had the ego for something like that," she said. "But coming up with a plan that complicated? No. Every brilliant idea he ever pitched sounded like something he'd copied from somewhere else." She folded her arms. "I only invited him into the band because I thought he might bring fresh energy. I also knew Mikey trusted my judgment, so I figured he'd go along with it." A look of regret crossed her face. "What I never expected was one trying to make me his girlfriend." She grimaced. "He made my skin crawl." Her voice hardened. "He wasn't any different from the other terrible men I'd dated." After a moment, she sighed. "The relationship was fake. I played along because we thought the publicity would help the band. Compared to everything Mikey was already sacrificing for our image, pretending to date one felt like a small price to pay." Her expression softened. "But every time I saw the look on Mikey's face," she looked away, "I knew I was hurting him. I always try to make things right afterward, but it was never enough." She leaned against the counter, gathering her thoughts. Then Juan and Kayla started spreading that ridiculous story about someone at a hotel threatening to expose us. She shook her head. That's when I reluctantly began visiting Juan's room. She met Alexis's eyes. "But I never let him touch me. If he got angry because of that, I didn't care. He'd already managed to come between Mikey and me." Rubbing her temples, she continued. "I honestly don't know how everything spiraled into surgery. That was never something I wanted." She closed her eyes briefly. "Mikey probably convinced himself Juan and I were really together. I try to tell him otherwise." Her shoulders slumped. "But I don't think he ever believed me." She glanced toward Alexis again. "Then Kim brought you into the band." A deep sadness entered her voice. "I think that was the moment Mikey finally gave up. He had just gone through surgery because he believed it was for the band's future. And when he came back, someone else had already taken his place." Her voice cracked. "We stole the band from him." She swallowed hard. "Music was his entire world. And we destroyed it." Silence settled over the room. Finally, Mila spoke again, almost in a whisper. "Maybe that's why all this is happening to me." She looked down at her hands. "Maybe this is karma." I stood there while Juan and Kayla kept pushing him further and further. There was no anger left in her voice, only acceptance. Alexis sat quietly, replaying everything she had heard. Gradually, scattered pieces began fitting together. She looked up thoughtfully. "You know, I don't think any of us were seeing the whole picture." She leaned forward. "I think someone was manipulating every one of us." Mila's eyes suddenly widened. Kim. The name escaped almost instantly. It had to be her. She stared into the distance. How did I miss it? She was always there. Every major decision, every suggestion, every little push in exactly the direction things eventually went. She frowned. She encouraged the image change, the publicity stunts, everything. After thinking another moment, she nodded slowly. "And I'm almost certain she planted the idea about surgery too." She hesitated. "Although," she looked at Alexis, "maybe she wouldn't have gotten that far if you hadn't helped make me look and behave more feminine back then." A second later, she shook her head. "No, that isn't what matters right now." Just then, the apartment door opened. Mila glanced toward the entrance. "Oh, hey, Beth." She smiled automatically. "You're back." Then she stopped speaking. Confusion spread across her face. "Wait, what were we talking about?" Without saying a word, Beth slowly reached up and lifted away her wig. Next came the padding that had subtly altered her appearance. Piece by piece, the disguise disappeared. Standing before them was Riley. Mila stared in complete disbelief. "Oh my God. Her voice trembled.
Beth.
Riley. She laughed nervously. I don't even know what I'm supposed to call you anymore. Before anyone could react, she rushed across the room and threw her arms around Riley. She hugged tightly, covering Riley's face with emotional kisses. Mikey. Her voice broke. I missed you so much. Where did you go? You just vanished. I looked everywhere. She stepped back, tears streaming down her cheeks. Juan couldn't stop me from chasing after you that night. When he finally let me go, I ran to find you, but you were already gone. A bittersweet laugh escaped between her tears. And do you remember what happened after that? She wiped her eyes. I slapped Juan so hard. She looked toward Alexis with an embarrassed smile. Do you remember? Alexis laughed. Oh, I definitely remember.
She grinned.
I had absolutely no idea why you did it back then, but you hit him with everything you had. She chuckled. He walked around with a bruise on his face for days. Despite everything that had happened, all three of them found themselves laughing at the memory, if only for a brief moment. Mila, Alexis said quietly, for the longest time, I believed you were the one pulling all the strings behind everything that happened to Riley. She shook her head. Now I realize how wrong I was. Riley slowly stepped out of Mila's embrace, tears shimmering in her eyes. Mila, she whispered, there's something I need to tell you. Her voice cracked. I've done something terrible, something driven by anger and bitterness. She swallowed hard. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. Mila looked at her with gentle concern. Sweetheart, what could you possibly have done? She asked softly. You've always been one of the kindest people I've ever known. Riley gave a sad smile. Maybe I was back when I was Mikey. She lowered her gaze. But after everything happened, after I lost my identity and the band I loved, I wasn't the same person anymore. She took a slow breath. I convinced myself that the only way to move forward was to make someone else experience the same pain. Mila frowned, unable to follow. What are you talking about? Riley looked directly into her eyes. I did to you what I believed had been done to me. Silence settled over the room. I'm responsible for what's happening to you. Her words barely rose above a whisper. I'm the reason your body has been changing. She closed her eyes briefly. I thought it was justice. Another tear slipped down her cheek. But revenge doesn't only destroy the person you're trying to hurt. It destroys you too. She wiped her face. I'm so sorry, Mila. I'll spend however long it takes trying to undo what I've done. I promise. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then, unexpectedly, Mila laughed. It started as a quiet chuckle before growing into uncontrollable laughter that echoed through the apartment. She dropped into a chair, struggling to catch her breath. Finally, she looked up with watery eyes and an amused smile. So, she laughed again. The universe decided I had to start turning into a man before I'd finally get my sweetheart back? She shook her head in disbelief. If that's what it took, I'd still choose it. Riley blinked, stunned. Mila. Mila reached for her hand. You have no idea how much I owe you. Her expression turned serious. I've spent years regretting what happened. I acted out of fear. I should have protected you. I'm sorry. She squeezed Riley's hand gently. You never deserved what those people put you through. Her eyes hardened with determination. And as for the ones who really caused all this, she took a deep breath. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure they answer for what they did. Riley and Alexis exchanged a glance. Then both of them burst into laughter. You're a little late, they said in unison. Mila stared at them. What do you mean? Before either of them could explain, the apartment door burst open. Dr. Johns hurried inside, followed closely by two paramedics pushing emergency equipment. Mila. His voice carried unmistakable urgency. We have to get you to the hospital immediately. He motioned toward the medical team. A medical evacuation helicopter is already inbound. Let's move. Everything after that happened almost too quickly to process. The paramedics efficiently lifted Mila onto a stretcher, secured the safety straps, attached monitoring equipment, and wheeled her toward the waiting ambulance. Riley hurried after them. Where are you taking her? No one answered immediately. Outside, the sound of helicopter blades grew louder, filling the air with a powerful roar. The stretcher was transferred directly to the waiting aircraft. As the flight crew prepared for departure, Dr. Johns climbed aboard. Riley shouted one final question. "Which hospital?" The doctor leaned toward the open door. "Matthews General." The helicopter doors closed. Seconds later, the aircraft rose into the sky and disappeared beyond the buildings. Barely an hour later, Riley and Alexis were on the road. Before leaving, they packed a small bag with clothes and essentials Mila might need, quickly cleaned the apartment, and called Miss Gallen to explain the emergency and cancel their dinner plans. Then they drove straight to the hospital. At the emergency department reception desk, Alexis stepped forward. "We're here for Mila Benson." The receptionist looked up from her computer. "Are you immediate family?" Riley and Alexis exchanged a brief look. Without hesitation, they answered together. "We're her sisters." The explanation was accepted without further questions. Within minutes, both women were escorted to the laboratory, where blood samples were collected to determine compatibility. To everyone's surprise, both proved to be perfect matches. The following hours passed in a blur of hospital routines. Each of them donated blood, rested, ate, drank plenty of fluids, and returned later that day to donate again as additional supplies were needed. By the time they finished, exhaustion had settled over both of them. They waited together outside the surgical wing, where 3 operating rooms branched off a quiet corridor. Time seemed to crawl. Eventually, one of the operating room doors opened. Dr. Johns stepped into the hallway while removing his surgical mask, finishing a conversation with another physician. Riley and Alexis immediately stood. The doctor noticed them and walked over. "What are you two still doing here?" he asked with a tired smile. Alexis smiled despite her exhaustion. "We just escaped Dracula's blood bank," she joked, lifting the bandage on her arm. "Thought we'd stop by and check on our sister." Dr. John smiled as he recognized them. "So, you were the blood donors." Alexis raised her hand with a tired grin. "That's us." "I'm grateful you both came," the doctor replied. "Your donations, combined with the blood we already had available, allowed us to completely replace the contaminated blood in Mila's system." He paused, reflecting on the operation. The most difficult part was stabilizing her liver and kidneys. Those organs always take the longest to recover, but thankfully they responded well. Riley's hands tightened together. "So, she's going to make it?" Dr. Johns gave an encouraging nod. "Everything is pointing toward a full recovery." Both Riley and Alexis let out the breath they had been holding. The relief lasted only a moment before the doctor's expression grew serious again. "She's not out of the woods yet. We'll be keeping her here for at least 2 weeks, so we can monitor her closely." He looked at them carefully. "There were 2 separate moments during surgery when we nearly lost her." The word struck Riley like a punch to the chest. "But she never stopped fighting," Dr. Johns continued. "If you ask me, she had a powerful reason to survive." Tears filled both women's eyes. Without thinking, they stepped forward and hugged him at the same time. "Whatever you ever need," Riley said through tears, "whether it's blood, money, or anything else, just ask." The doctor smiled warmly. "The best thing you can do is keep supporting her." Afterward, a nurse led them to the reception area, where they left Mila's personal belongings for safekeeping.